Today, let's talk about blowback. Stay tuned, everybody. Hey, for the best meat you have ever eaten, check out samsbutchershop.com. Go and shop around. When you go to checkout, enter the promo code Triple T for a 5% discount. Check it out. And a good Thursday to all of you. Hello, everyone. I am Trailer Trash Tim. Welcome to the channel. How's your mama and them? I hope all of you are well. I'm glad you have joined me today for another session together. I meant to say this yesterday, and I just flat forgot it. I just really want to thank all of you for being a part of the channel, and I really want to thank all of you who have reached out to me, both in the comments on the videos. I really appreciate that a lot. A lot of you have emailed me, and some of you have even thrown some support for all the work that I'm doing on the channel, and I'm very grateful to you for that. So thank you, one and all. I appreciate each and every one of you very, very much. I know that I tried to point out the fact yesterday that the headline for us in the West, among other things I pointed out, the headline for us in the West, of course, is our own wars on our borders. I'm talking about Western nations, from the United States to the UK to France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Canada. That's still the top of our headlines, or it should be. Now, when you turn on cable news or any of the letter networks, or read the newspaper, if anybody still reads a newspaper, or online news, by and large, the headlines will be about Israel. And it is important. I don't mean to diminish that at all. It's certainly newsworthy. Is my mic on? Yeah. But I have maintained that in the West, our headline still needs to be our porous borders. We're being invaded every day. I also pointed out other things that need to be in our collective headlines, but you can go back and watch that video and get more of that. But today I want to talk about something that certainly affects all of us, particularly in the West. And what I want to talk about is a concept or a term that is known as blowback. Now you may ask, well, what is blowback? Well, here is a definition for you so that you can understand what I want to talk about today and how we are all so affected by what our collective governments do in other nations of the world. Blowback is simply defined as this. Blowback is the unintended consequences and unwanted side effects of a covert operation. In other words, when you interfere in the business of another nation, you better know what you're doing, because the odds are, if you go in there and bungle things, or if you go in there and create uprisings among the people because they reject what you're doing, you may very well be subject to blowback from that nation or the people that are in that nation. This is a very real thing that has absolutely affected us in the West. It has absolutely caused what I'm going to share with you today, some negative consequences because of our insistence on meddling in the affairs with other nations. And I'm going to give you many different examples. I can't cover them all today because of time. But I'm going to give you many examples of blowback, how we have suffered these unintended consequences because we simply cannot mind our own business. Now, to clarify, I am talking about the deep state. I am talking about organizations such as the CIA or the NSA or the neocons, who just cannot sit on their hands. They've got to go and interfere with other nations because, you know, their adolescent thinking is one that was endorsed and embraced by George W. Bush when he said, something's going on somewhere in nation A or B or C, so we've got to send our troops over to deal with it before it comes to our shores. This is a faulty theory. It has resulted in a whole lot of death, destruction, and mayhem for America as well as other free people in the world. because of our insistence on meddling in other nations. I'm going to give you some examples which will hopefully make clear what I'm talking about. And let's start in the nation of Syria. But before I do that, let me just say this. There's an old saying that goes like this: ideas have consequences, and I would add to that, actions have consequences. Before you do anything, you must consider the ramifications of what you are doing. You gotta plan ahead. You gotta look toward the future. You've got to say, I want to do this, but before I do this, I've got to consider the future. I've got to consider the ramifications of today's decision on the future. If you go to a bank to sign a 30-year mortgage on a home, you better have a plan of action for the next 30 years so that you won't lose your home, right? You've got to have a plan. You've got to have it figured out on paper. So actions have consequences. For everything that you do, there is a consequence. For every action you take, for every idea you have, if you act on that idea, there is always a consequence to follow at some point. That may be a good thing, of course, if you make the proper decision, but it can also be a very bad thing. It may be something that you feel is the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do. You may act in haste without counting the cost, as they say, or considering the ramifications of your decision. You don't build a house without a blueprint. You don't just start laying brick without having something on paper that acts as a guide for you as you begin to build. You don't just willy-nilly build something like that. Because if you do it that way, your house may very well collapse on you. So you've got to have a plan in place, a good plan in place, because your actions do have consequences. Now, at one time, the nation of Syria was ruled over by a man by the name of Assad, not the current Assad. It was his father, and the United States did not like this man, and they wanted to do something that they specialize in, quote unquote, and that is regime change. And so the United States supported an uprising to replace the Syrian president, Assad. And the Syrian jihadists, there were Syrian jihadists, and they were supported by us, and these jihadists ran amok eventually. This band of gunmen were trained and armed in Jordan by the CIA. And then they were just turned loose on Syria. Do you know who these gunmen that were trained by the CIA are better known as today? We know them better today as ISIS. Did you know that ISIS was trained by the CIA? Oh, they were. That's example number one. That's an example of blowback, okay? Here's another example for you. There was a man in Libya by the name of Muammar Gaddafi. We didn't like Gaddafi for various reasons. One would speculate that one reason we didn't like Gaddafi is because he rejected the dollar as the reserve currency. Whatever the case, this happened when the esteemed Hillary Rodham Clinton was Secretary of State. And we do what we did best. We toppled the Gaddafi regime. Do you remember that Hillary came on camera and gleefully said, "We came, we saw, and we killed him"? And like that was a good thing. Now, what has been the consequence of that action? Well, since the time that we toppled Gaddafi, the toppling of Gaddafi resulted in refugees fleeing Libya and going all over Europe. It also resulted in a return en masse of slavery in Libya. Okay? Actions have consequences. Now, these people like Hillary Clinton, they would be just aghast over the concept of slavery, right? Well, that's what we've got because of what she did, what the Obama administration did. Now, I want to talk for a minute. I'm going to give some other examples, but I want to stop because this one's a big one. Let's talk about Hamas. As you know, there is a raging war now in Israel and in Palestine. And God help us that it does not escalate to where it involves Syria and Iran, because if it does, folks, I'm telling you, we got a whole new ball game, as everybody probably knows. Hopefully this war can be contained between Israel and Palestine. I don't know if that's going to be the case right now. It's just utter carnage over there from what I understand. But you know that it is a war between Israel and this faction called Hamas emanating from Palestine. Well, who is Hamas? Where did Hamas come from? Don't get ahead of me because you're probably right. Hamas was an organization that was started by Israel, and you could effectively say the United States CIA as well, because we're kind of one and the same in many aspects. Why did Israel start Hamas? Israel started Hamas years ago to counteract the Palestinian leader by the name of Yasser Arafat. Do you remember them? Do you remember him? Yasser Arafat, who was a thorn in the side of Israel for decades. He was from Palestine. So Israel started Hamas to counteract Arafat. Now, the United States subsequently, years later, encouraged the Palestinians to have free and open elections, which they did. Guess who the Palestinians elected as their leaders? Anybody want to guess? You got it. They elected Hamas. They elected Hamas. So Israel and the United States CIA created a monster that now they have to slay. Did you know that? Did you know that's where Hamas came from? Israel started Hamas, and now they're having a deal with Hamas. Perhaps it's better the devil you know. Perhaps it's better for us not to meddle in other nations' affairs. Let's go on. Let's talk about Iraq. We invaded Iraq under George W. Bush under the pretense that they had WMD, weapons of mass destruction, and we were going to topple Saddam Hussein, who was once an ally of ours, and I'll get to that in just a moment. And so we did. We went in there and we just wreaked havoc in the nation of Iraq. For what reason? Well, we were told that Saddam Hussein undoubtedly had some kind of hand in 9/11, but regardless, he had weapons of mass destruction and he was an imminent threat to the security of the United States, so we had to go and topple him. I'm not saying Saddam Hussein was a good guy. I am saying it was none of our business, and I'm also saying that he had nothing to do with 9/11. Now, let's move on to Iran because this kind of ties in with Iraq. In 1953, Iran was ruled by a democratically elected prime minister by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh. Mohammad Mossadegh. And in 1953, he wasn't playing ball with the CIA or the United States, so we sent the CIA in to instigate a coup against the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh. Now, what were the results of that coup in 1953? The results of the coup were the rising to power of the Shah of Iran. And the Shah of Iran became one of the most bloodthirsty dictators in the world. The Shah of Iran. He was vicious, he was brutal, and the CIA, America's CIA, helped the Shah of Iran to train his internal police force that was named Savak, S-A-V-A-K, Savak. Because the Shah of Iran was such a bloody and ruthless dictator, eventually the people of Iran said, enough of this, and they rose up against him in 1979 and toppled him. Now, what happened after they toppled the Shah of Iran? You may well remember that after the Shah was deposed, Iran since that time has been ruled by basically a theocratic dictatorship. The Shah was toppled and replaced by a subsequent series of ayatollahs. Okay? Now, could you argue that the people of Iran would have been better off had we not interfered in their nation and they had been able to keep their prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, who they elected in democratic fashion? Now, after that time, we had trouble, of course, with the Ayatollahs. As you all know, they took Americans hostage, 444 Americans in 1979, or was it 444 days? They held them hostage until President Reagan took office. But at that time, the CIA was backing another world leader in his war against Iran, and he was our ally. Do you know who that world leader was? You got it. That was Saddam Hussein. He was one of our guys. You know how that went eventually, right? Do you know who else was once an ally of the United States and a CIA asset? That was a man, this was in the 1980s, that was a man by the name of Osama bin Laden. Did you know that Osama bin Laden was trained by the CIA of the United States? Do you know that Osama bin Laden was an asset of the United States? Did you know that? We trained Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan to radicalize Muslims. Do you know why? We trained Osama bin Laden to radicalize Muslims so that they could more effectively war against the then Soviet Union in their warring efforts in Afghanistan. Man, is this hitting home with anybody? Let's go on. In Guatemala, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected Jacob R. Benz, to be followed by dictators whose bloodthirsty policies killed over 100,000 Guatemalans over a span of 40 years. I could go on with nation after nation after nation. We interfered, the CIA I'm talking about. Remember now, the CIA did not exist from the founding of the country. The CIA is a fairly recent organization. The CIA was begun by President Harry Truman in the 1940s. America fundamentally changed after the Second World War, and we became more of a military state and an intelligence state, basically in response to the Soviet Union, because we were concerned about the communists and their progressions around the world. And I can understand that, but we completely reversed our previous course, and President Truman signed off on the CIA and the NSA, and these agencies, along with the military, absolutely exploded in size and scope and operation after the Second World War. Remember what I said earlier about unintended consequences, that actions and ideas have consequences, and now all this huge monolith of so-called defense operations are not defensive at all, they are offensive, and this meddling in affairs of other nations has resulted in even more meddling in other nations, and even on the American people in terms of the surveillance state, folks. President Eisenhower warned us about this in his address as he was leaving the presidency, and he warned us about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, and he was exactly right. President Kennedy had made the decision to dismantle the CIA, and as I said yesterday, I firmly believe that's what got him killed. You're just not going to tinker with these people. You're not going to turn them back. Remember what I said earlier, that in our founding government, we didn't have any of this. We didn't have a Pentagon. We didn't have a military-industrial complex. We didn't have foreign military bases. Under America's founding government system of limited government, a limited government republic, there was no Pentagon. There was no military-industrial complex. There was no CIA. There was no NSA. There were no foreign military bases. There was no foreign aid. There were no alliances with dictatorial regimes or regime-changing invasions and occupations. We never had any of this. The founding fathers of the United States would find what we're doing today absolutely abhorrent. And it is. And they were wise. They would understand the concept of blowback. They would understand that ideas and actions have consequences. Blowback, again defined, is the unintended consequences and unwanted side effects of a covert operation. Let's continue with examples. I'm not going to go into detail on all these nations, but it is mind-boggling the nations that we have had covert operations in and CIA operatives and the CIA of America toppling legitimate regimes and governments in nations. We've done it in Vietnam. We have done it in Haiti at least twice. We did it in Laos. We did it in the Dominican Republic. We did it in Ecuador. We did it in the Congo. We did it in Honduras. We did it in Brazil, Indonesia, Greece, Bolivia, Cambodia, Chile, Panama, Australia in 1975, Angola, Iran, Afghanistan, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. Those are some examples where we went in and meddled with the affairs of sovereign nations. What have been the consequences of our meddling? Blowback. This is what we have to remember. This right here is what we have to remember. Let me get to it here. Foreign meddling in other nations is what causes terrorism. If you go and start meddling in the affairs of your next door neighbor, maybe you're picking some watermelons out of his garden or something, or you're interfering in his peace and tranquility and solitude. Do you not think at some point in time there's going to be a response? Do you not think at some point in time he's going to have something to say to you and it ain't going to be pretty? Blowback results in unintended consequences, and foreign and the meddling of the CIA and the American government and the British government and Western governments results in terrorism. That's where this stuff comes from. Listen at what Michael Flynn said. Michael Flynn is the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was asked in the year 2015 this question. He was asked whether, in light of the rise of ISIS, he regrets the invasion of Iraq, and what he replies is instructive. Listen at what General Flynn said. Absolutely. The historic lesson is that it was a strategic failure to go into Iraq. And then he added this: instead of asking why they attacked us, we asked where they came from. Why did they attack us instead of where did you come from? Well, they came from this place, so we're going to go attack this place. The question to be asked was, why did you attack us? That is a valid question, because you can gain some very valuable information if you simply ask that question. It's kind of like JFK. People were always saying, who shot JFK? But the question, as film director Oliver Stone proffered, is not who shot him, but why did they shoot him? The why is the more important. The who is peripheral. The why. Why did they kill Kennedy? Well, we got a pretty good idea why they killed Kennedy. Why did nations such as Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and others, why do they export terrorism to the West? Folks, it's very simple. It's because of blowback. It is because we cannot mind our own business and tend to our own affairs. We've got no business being in Syria. We've got no business being in Haiti. We've got no business being in Iraq. We never did have. We've got no business meddling in the affairs of Iran as we once did. We had no business going into Vietnam. No business going into Brazil or Nicaragua or Australia, for heaven's sakes. All these nations, nation after nation after nation, these are sovereign nations, and the United States government and the CIA had no business going in there and meddling in their affairs, because all it does is cause blowback and cause trouble for us here at home. These operations are the seedbed from which terrorism emanates. We trained Osama bin Laden, and look at the result of it. We created a monster. Israel created Hamas, and now they have a monster they have to slay. Does any of this make sense with anybody? Does it not? You know what gripes me more than anything else? Some people think, well, you just don't love your country. You're against your country. I am not against my country. I have pointed out I love my country. I am an American. I bleed red, white, and blue. I am a patriot. I love my country. But patriots speak out against their government when they're doing the wrong thing. And this meddling in the affairs of other nations is the wrong thing. And this explosion of the military-industrial complex and these letter agencies such as the CIA and the NSA and all these other nations and FISA courts and the surveillance state, we should be speaking out against this because it is wrong. It is unconstitutional, and the founding fathers would be stunned that we are suffering under this today. They would absolutely be opposed to it. They didn't even have standing armies back in the day, for heaven's sakes. I know we have so many threats around the world that threaten our safety and our security, but folks, so much of this is self-inflicted because it is blowback, because we would not mind our own business. I hope this makes sense today, and I hope enough Americans will wake up to what is happening, and Westerners, and I think they are. I know a lot of people in the United States are waking up to the fact that we are pursuing a policy of utter folly in Ukraine, for example. God help us all. Blowback is a very real thing, and we would do well to wake up and understand that actions have consequences. Let us plead with our politicians that they think these things through before they commit us to these wars that we've got no business being involved in. I'd love to hear your comments about what I said today. If you would post them down below, I really would love to hear that. I read them all. I try and respond to a few of them if I can, but I'm really pressed for time between my job and this and all the research and reading that I have to do. Do me a big favor, if you would, please subscribe to this channel down below, as long as you're not an illegal alien or you do not wear a face mask. Hey, give this video a big thumbs up. I would really appreciate that if you would down below. It would help our algorithm. Everybody go out and have a tremendous Thursday. This is Trailer Trash Tim, and I will see you tomorrow.